Okay, welcome to the last episode in our 5-part series of Cluster B disorders. It's been a long road writing and recording this series, and I will say that in this last episode, there are a few times I go off script and use a personal example, and it seems sometimes like I fixate on this example. But the reality is I don't have too many personal examples to go by, and it's just that this one particular example was a gold mine for information, podcast episodes, etc. Not to mention social media when I got back on it, which I have now taken a step back from. Now, if I write a podcast episode, I will install Facebook, post that script, and then delete the app again. I find I have a lot more peace when my algorithms aren't pushing other people's failing relationships or short-sighted advice or advice that's twisted and skewed to fit their own self-limiting beliefs and toxic behaviors. So without further ado, let's get going. Okay, welcome to the final episode of our series on Cluster B personality disorders. It's been a long road getting these written and recorded. Today, we're going to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. We'll examine the behaviors that individuals with different cluster B disorders often share, but more importantly, we'll explore the distinct whys behind these actions. While people with various cluster B disorders might engage in similar behaviors, such as manipulation, abrupt endings to relationships, often referred to as discarding, or intense emotional reactions, the reasons driving these behaviors can vary significantly depending on the specific disorder. Understanding these differences is crucial. It can help us develop more effective treatment strategies, improve our ability to set appropriate boundaries, and foster greater empathy for individuals struggling with these disorders. In this episode, we'll focus on several key behaviors common across cluster B disorders, including manipulation tactics, the phenomenon of discarding in relationships, intense emotional reactions, difficulty with or incapable of empathy, if not logical empathy, then emotional empathy, unstable self-image, impulsivity, fear of abandonment, difficulty with object constancy, idealization and devaluation cycles, interpersonal exploitation, need for external validation, difficulty with accountability, boundary violations, emotional dysregulation, and attention-seeking behaviors. For each of these, we'll explore how and why they manifest differently in IDD, our term for ASPD, Antisocial Personality Disorder, ESFD, our term for NPD, Narcissistic Personality Disorder, DASD, our term for BPD, Borderline Personality Disorder, and EID, our term for HPD, Histrionic Personality Disorder. Remember, these types of people and the ones who are with them or have been with someone with one of these disorders are the very people who need this information the most, not just the people who want to avoid these types or are confused about what they do. Using terms that describe the core of each behavior helps us focus on the core problem with each of these disorders. This exploration will help us understand that while the outward behaviors might look similar, the internal experiences and motivations can vary greatly. Let's begin our final journey into the complex world of cluster B personality disorders as we seek to understand not just the what, but the all-important why behind these challenging behaviors. We'll break this down into digestible pieces using simple language that a 10th grader could understand. We'll use the alternative names I've provided for each disorder to reduce stigma and focus on the core aspects again. Let's start with the first category, manipulation tactics. Manipulation is when someone tries to control or influence others, often in sneaky ways. People with cluster B disorders might use manipulation for different reasons. These common and shared tactics are ordered from most insidious and harmful to least insidious and harmful. Gaslighting, isolation, triangulation, victim blaming, stonewalling, silent treatment, projection, flying monkeys, guilt tripping, fear-mongering, love bombing, hoovering, push-pull dynamics, chronic criticism, pathologizing, shaming, splitting, moving the goalposts, withholding information, bait and switch, time pressure, negging, favor or debt shaming, selective attention, pretend ignorance, feigned helplessness, overwhelming someone with procedures and red tape, mirroring, and last but not least, flattery. The tragedy of these manipulation tactics is profound. When someone chooses to employ these methods, they've already lost a game they didn't realize they were playing. While they might achieve short-term goals, the long-term consequences are severe. People eventually catch on to these tactics, leading to distrust, resentment, and even contempt. The manipulator ends up isolating themselves, proving they're not equal to those they try to manipulate, but rather demonstrating a lack of emotional maturity and ethical behavior. Remember, emotionally healthy individuals do not pull these type of tactics because they are childish, and once you understand them, they're very obvious to spot. In the age of social media, these tactics become even more visible. Ironically, the very platforms that manipulators use to seek attention and validation often end up exposing their behaviors to a wider audience. What they intended as a stage for admiration becomes a spotlight on their manipulative tendencies. And remember, sometimes people who follow these people are just there for the popcorn. Ultimately, those who consistently use these tactics serve as cautionary tales rather than examples to admire. They demonstrate the consequences of choosing manipulation over genuine growth and connection. The real challenge and the path to true respect and fulfilling relationships lies in choosing to grow and evolve, no matter how difficult that process might be. It's a journey of self-improvement that requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront one's own shortcomings. While this path is undoubtedly harder, it's the only one that leads to genuine connections and lasting self-esteem. Let's look at some common manipulation tactics and why each type might use them. 1. Gaslighting, or making someone doubt their own reality. What it is: a persistent pattern of denial, misdirection, and lying that causes the target to question their own memory, perception, and sanity. What it isn't: simple disagreement or having a different perspective. Gaslighting involves a deliberate attempt to undermine someone's reality over time. IDD, or impulsive disregard disorder, or ASPD. They might do this to avoid getting caught or to keep control in a situation. They don't really care about how it affects others. ESFD, or extreme self-focus disorder, NPD, they use gaslighting to maintain their image of perfection and avoid admitting faults. EID, emotional intensity disorder, or BPD, they might gaslight unintentionally, as their own perception of reality can shift dramatically. DASD, or dramatic attention-seeking disorder, HPD, they might exaggerate or twist events to make themselves the center of attention. 2. Isolation, cutting the target off from their support systems. What it is: systematic efforts to separate someone from their friends, family, or other support networks. What it isn't: wanting to spend quality time alone with a partner or having natural fluctuations in social interactions. IDD. They isolate others to maintain control and prevent their exploitative behavior from being exposed. ESFD. They isolate others to ensure they remain the primary source of validation and to prevent others from influencing their target's perception of them. EID. They may isolate out of fear of abandonment, trying to keep their partner all to themselves. DASD. They might isolate to ensure they remain the center of attention in their target's life. 3. Triangulation, involving a third party to validate the manipulator's perspective. What it is: deliberately bringing another person into a situation to create jealousy, confusion, or to gain support against the target. What it isn't: naturally involving others in conversations or seeking advice from a third party in a transparent manner. IDD. They use this to create chaos and maintain control over multiple people simultaneously. ESFD. They triangulate to boost their ego by showing they're more desirable or important than others. EID. They might triangulate due to fear of embarrassment, trying to make their partner jealous or prove their worth. DASD. They use this to create drama and keep themselves at the center of attention. 4. Victim blaming, shifting blame to the target for the manipulator's actions. What it is: consistently holding the target responsible for the manipulator's harmful behavior or for the problems in the relationship. What it isn't: addressing genuine issues or holding someone accountable for their actual mistakes in a balanced, fair manner. IDD. They blame others to avoid consequences for their actions, showing no remorse. ESFD. They blame others to maintain their perfect image and to avoid admitting faults. EID. They might blame others during emotional outbursts, often feeling genuinely victimized in the moment. DASD. They may blame others to gain sympathy and attention, casting themselves as the wronged party. 5. Stonewalling, refusing to communicate or cooperate. What it is: a persistent refusal to communicate or engage, often used as a form of emotional manipulation or control. What it isn't: taking a brief time out to cool down during an argument or needing some alone time to process emotions. IDD. They might use this to avoid accountability or to punish others. ESFD. They stonewall to regain control when they feel their ego has been threatened. EID. They might stonewall as a defense mechanism when feeling overwhelmed by emotions. DASD. They may use this to create drama or to get others to chase after them for attention. 6. Silent treatment. What it is: a deliberate and prolonged period of silence towards someone as a form of punishment or control. What it isn't: taking a short break from communication to calm down or gather thoughts. IDD. They might use this as a form of punishment or to avoid responsibility. ESFD. They use this to regain control when they feel their ego has been threatened. EID. They might give the silent treatment out of fear or intense emotional pain. DASD. They may use this to draw attention back to themselves when they feel ignored. 7. Projection, accusing the target of the manipulator's own negative traits or behaviors. What it is: attributing one's own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or actions to someone else. What it isn't: genuine concern about someone's behavior based on observable evidence. IDD. They project to deflect attention from their own misdeeds and avoid accountability. ESFD. They project their own insecurities onto others to maintain their grandiose self-image. EID. They might project their fears or insecurities onto others during emotional turmoil. DASD. They may project their need for attention onto others, accusing them of being dramatic. 8. Flying monkeys, enlisting others to do the manipulator's bidding. What it is: recruiting others to harass, monitor, or manipulate the target on behalf of the manipulator. What it isn't: seeking support or advice from friends in a genuine, non-manipulative way. IDD. They use this to extend their control and intimidate their target through numbers. ESFD. They enlist others to validate their perspective and maintain their image of superiority. EID. They might use this tactic during splitting episodes, turning people against those they feel have wronged them. DASD. They may use this to create more drama and attention around themselves. 9. Guilt tripping. What it is: deliberately inducing feelings of guilt in someone to manipulate their emotions and actions. What it isn't: expressing genuine hurt or disappointment in a respectful, non-manipulative way. IDD. They use guilt to avoid responsibility and manipulate others into doing what they want. ESFD. They employ guilt to maintain their superior position and get others to cater to their needs. EID. They might guilt trip due to intense fear of abandonment or perceived rejection. DASD. They use guilt to gain attention and sympathy, often dramatizing situations. 10. Fear-mongering. What it is: using fear tactics to influence someone's behavior or decisions. What it isn't: providing factual information about potential risks or consequences. IDD. They use fear to control others and maintain power in relationships. ESFD. They may use fear to keep others dependent on them or to bolster their own importance. EID. They might engage in fear-mongering due to their own intense fears and anxieties. DASD. They may exaggerate dangers to create drama and position themselves as a protector. Number 11. Love bombing. What it is: an overwhelming display of affection and attention, especially early in a relationship, to gain control or influence. What it isn't: genuine expressions of affection that develop naturally over time. Could be short periods, could be long periods. IDD. They use this to quickly gain trust and exploit someone. ESFD. They do this to feed their ego and secure admiration from others. EID. They may love bomb intensely due to fear of abandonment and a desire for closeness. DASD. They use this to gain attention and feel desirable to others. 12. Hoovering. What it is: attempting to re-engage someone in a relationship after a period of separation or conflict. What it isn't: genuine efforts to reconcile or improve a relationship with mutual respect and changed behavior. IDD. They might hoover to regain access to resources or control they've lost. ESFD. They hoover to regain a source of admiration and maintain their self-image. EID. They may hoover out of a genuine fear of abandonment and desire for reconnection. DASD. They might hoover to regain attention and drama in their life. 13. Push-pull dynamics. What it is: alternating between showing affection and withdrawing it, creating emotional instability in the relationship. What it isn't: natural ebbs and flows in a relationship or needing occasional space. IDD. They use this to keep others off balance and maintain control in the relationship. ESFD. They engage in push-pull to keep others yearning for their approval and attention. EID. They might do this unintentionally due to their intense, fluctuating emotions and fear of abandonment. DASD. They use push-pull to create drama and keep others constantly engaged with them. 14. Chronic criticism. What it is: constantly finding fault with someone's actions, appearance, or character. What it isn't: offering constructive feedback in a supportive manner when appropriate. IDD. They criticize to undermine others' confidence and maintain dominance. ESFD. They use criticism to feel superior and mask their own insecurities. EID. They might criticize due to their own intense emotions and fear of rejection. DASD. They may use criticism to draw attention to themselves and create conflict. 15. Pathologizing. What it is: labeling someone's normal emotions or behaviors as symptoms of mental illness to discredit them. What it isn't: expressing genuine concern about someone's mental health and encouraging professional help. Been there, done that. IDD. They use this to avoid accountability by making others seem unreliable or unstable. ESFD. They pathologize to maintain their superior image and discredit others' perspectives. EID. They might do this unintentionally, projecting their own emotional instability onto others. DASD. They may pathologize to create drama and position themselves as the sane one. 16. Shaming. What it is: using humiliation or embarrassment to control or manipulate someone's behavior. What it isn't: respectfully addressing genuine concerns about harmful behavior. IDD. They use shaming to assert dominance and control over others. ESFD. They shame others to boost their own ego and maintain their grandiose self-image. EID. They might shame others during emotional outbursts, often feeling ashamed of themselves afterwards. DASD. They use shaming to create dramatic scenes and draw attention to themselves. 17. Splitting. What it is: viewing people or situations as all good or all bad with no middle ground. What it isn't: having preferences or making informed judgments based on a person's actions over time. IDD. They use splitting to justify exploiting those they view as bad and manipulating those they see as good. ESFD. They split to maintain their grandiose self-image, seeing others as either admirers or enemies. EID. They often engage in splitting due to intense emotions and difficulty with nuanced thinking. DASD. They might use splitting to create dramatic narratives and gain sympathy or attention. 18. Moving the goalposts. What it is: constantly changing expectations or criteria to keep someone off balance and feeling inadequate. What it isn't: adjusting expectations based on changing circumstances with clear communication. IDD. They do this to maintain control and keep others in a constant state of trying to please them. ESFD. They move goalposts to maintain their superiority and keep others striving for their approval. EID. They might do this unintentionally due to their shifting emotions and perceptions. DASD. They may move goalposts to create ongoing drama and keep attention focused on them. 19. Withholding information. What it is: deliberately keeping important information from someone to maintain an advantage or control. What it isn't: forgetting to mention something or choosing not to share personal information. IDD. They withhold information to maintain power and manipulate situations to their advantage. ESFD. They do this to maintain their image of superiority and keep others dependent on them. EID. They might withhold information out of fear or as a way to protect themselves emotionally. DASD. They may withhold information to create suspense or drama, drawing out attention. 20. Bait and switch. What it is: offering something desirable, like commitment, then replacing it with something less favorable once the other person is committed. What it isn't: changing plans due to unforeseen circumstances with honest communication. IDD. They use this to exploit others, gaining compliance through false promises. ESFD. They might do this to maintain admiration while avoiding actually meeting another's needs. EID. They may engage in this unintentionally due to rapid shifts in emotions or perceptions. DASD. They may use bait and switch to create dramatic reveals or maintain others' interests. 21. Time pressure. What it is: creating a false sense of urgency to force quick decisions without proper consideration. What it isn't: communicating genuine, time-sensitive matters that require prompt attention. IDD. They use this to manipulate others into making hasty decisions that benefit them. ESFD. They create time pressures to maintain control and prevent others from questioning their authority. EID. They might apply time pressure due to their own intense emotions and need for immediate reassurance. DASD. They may use this to create drama and excitement, keeping others engaged with them. 22. Negging. What it is: giving backhanded compliments or making subtle, negative remarks to undermine someone's confidence. What it isn't: offering genuine, constructive criticism or playful teasing between friends. IDD. They use negging to maintain dominance and keep others feeling insecure. ESFD. They neg to boost their own ego by making others feel inferior. EID. They might engage in negging unintentionally, projecting their own insecurities onto others. DASD. They may use negging to create emotional reactions and keep attention on themselves. 23. Favor or debt shaming. What it is: using past favors or perceived debts to manipulate someone into compliance or feelings of obligation. What it isn't: respectfully asking for reciprocation in a balanced relationship. IDD. They use this to exploit others and gain compliance through guilt. ESFD. They employ this tactic to maintain their superior position and keep others indebted to them. EID. They might use this fear of abandonment, trying to create lasting bonds through obligation. DASD. They may use favor shaming to gain attention and cast themselves as generous or victimized. 24. Selective attention. What it is: deliberately ignoring or dismissing certain aspects of a situation or conversation to maintain control. What it isn't: natural differences in focus or memory during conversations. IDD. They use this to avoid accountability and manipulate narratives to their advantage. ESFD. They employ selective attention to maintain their grandiose self-image and dismiss criticism. EID. They might do this unintentionally due to intense emotions coloring their perceptions. DASD. They may use selective attention to shape narratives that keep them at the center of attention. 25. Pretend ignorance. What it is: feigning a lack of understanding to avoid responsibility or manipulate a situation. What it isn't: genuinely not understanding something and asking for clarification. IDD. They use this to evade accountability for their actions. ESFD. They pretend ignorance to maintain their image of perfection when faced with mistakes. EID. They might do this as a defense mechanism when feeling overwhelmed or criticized. DASD. They may use pretend ignorance to create situations where others have to explain or focus on them. 26. Feigned helplessness. What it is: pretending to be incapable of doing something to manipulate others into doing it for them. What it isn't: genuinely asking for help when needed. IDD. They use this to exploit others' kindness and avoid responsibilities. ESFD. They might feign helplessness to receive attention and maintain their sense of importance. EID. They may do this out of fear of failure or abandonment if they don't perform perfectly. DASD. They use this to gain attention and cast themselves as needing to be taken care of. 27. Overwhelming with procedures and red tape. What it is: using unnecessary rules, procedures, or bureaucracy to control or frustrate others. What it isn't: following necessary protocols or regulations for legitimate reasons. IDD. They use this to maintain control and prevent others from questioning their authority. ESFD. They might do this to assert their importance and expertise over others. EID. They may engage in this due to anxiety about things not being done right, quote unquote. DASD. They might use this to create drama around simple tasks and keep attention on themselves. 28. Mirroring. What it is: copying someone's behaviors, interests, or personality traits to gain their trust quickly. What it isn't: naturally developing shared interests or empathizing with others. IDD. They use this to quickly gain trust for exploitation. ESFD. They mirror to gain admiration and maintain their image of being perfect for everyone. EID. They might mirror intensely due to a lack of stable self-identity and fear of rejection. DASD. They use mirroring to gain attention and approval from others. 29. Flattery. What it is: using excessive, insincere praise to manipulate someone's feelings or actions. What it isn't: giving genuine compliments or expressing sincere appreciation. IDD. They use flattery to lower others' defenses for exploitation. ESFD. They employ flattery to maintain their supply of admiration and reinforce their grandiose self-image. EID. They might use intense flattery out of a genuine but unstable sense of self or adoration. EID. They might use intense flattery out of a genuine but unstable sense of adoration. DASD. They use flattery to gain attention and position themselves as charming or likable. EID. They might use intense flattery out of a genuine but unstable sense of adoration. If one were to go through my Facebook page, there is a person on there that did that. I saw it for what it was. They are who they are. DASD. They use flattery to gain attention and position themselves as charming or likable. This completes our list of manipulation tactics and how they might manifest in different cluster B personality disorders. Remember, while these behaviors can be harmful, individuals with these disorders often aren't fully aware of the impact of their actions. Normal people don't do this. Understanding these patterns can help both those with the disorders and those interacting with them to recognize unhealthy dynamics and seek appropriate support or treatment. Now, we'll explore the other traits common among cluster B disorders. Remember, normal, healthy individuals do not do this. And so while everyone may do one or two of these at times based on extreme circumstances, if the manipulation we've talked about and everything we are going to continue talking about is a pattern, try to get them into therapy. If they don't want to actually work on themselves and are only willing to, quote, clear the air, end quote, as my last ex literally stated in an email, that's not a person who's ready or willing to work on themselves. At that point, know that you are not dealing with a rational, healthy human being. Leave them the tools for growth, as I did, and then simply let them go. Easier said than done, I know. But remember, they are not at your level, not even close. Regardless, it would be like you at a college level trying to connect with an emotional fifth grader. You'd need to talk about 48 different things before you could even get to talking about healthy boundaries versus barriers, for example. Because make no mistake, what they think are boundaries are actually barriers. And you are not a trained therapist, so it's not worth your time. And even if you're an ex-therapist, there's a myriad of emotionally healthy people out there, no matter how much you thought this person was a soulmate. Remember, you may be deeply in love with the person you thought they were. You may empathize with the person they've chosen to become, since it's not all their fault, as no one was born this way. But no one can love a person who shows a lot of these traits. They have to heal themselves. Give them the tools, then walk away. The phenomenon of discarding in relationships. I think I'm going to break these up into separate podcast episodes as well, because each one is extremely crucial to know and understand. And while chapters in this long form podcast are great and all, it may be easier for people to digest if I break up the other 14 things, including the one with manipulation, into separate episodes. So that's what I'm going to do. But for now, we're going to keep going on this. So stay tuned. All of these are going to be in this episode. But like I said, I will be breaking these up into separate sections because I'm a big advocate of knowing the why of things, especially when these are confusing, because normal, healthy people do not do these things. So I will break them up into separate podcast episodes with the title of what it is. And that way it will be much easier to access for everyone else. With that in mind, let's get into the phenomenon of discarding in relationships. Discarding in relationships, the why of things, part 2 of 15. In healthy, emotionally intelligent relationships, abrupt discarding is virtually non-existent. Most people work through challenges rather than suddenly abandoning someone, making it especially confusing when you encounter someone who discards without warning. Discarding in the context of relationships refers to the abrupt, often cruel, ending of a relationship, typically without warning or clear explanation. It's like flipping a switch. One moment the person seems fully engaged, and the next they have emotionally and often physically checked out. This behavior is common among individuals with cluster B personality traits and can leave those on the receiving end feeling blindsided, confused, and deeply hurt. For example, my last ex, I clapped her on the back after a competition. I meant that in a form of, like, you're my physical and cognitive equal. And she took that as an offense. She whirled around, said something like, bro, I told you I'm not an impact play. Me, assuming she's my equal, thought she was talking shit. I talked shit back. And then I realized oh, something terrible just happened and I don't know what's going on. And of course, I was emotionally codependent at the time because my partner had died. I was blinded by that. I'd never been emotionally codependent in my life. So I was feeling a bunch of things that I couldn't recognize because I'd never felt those things before, right? It was all used against me, but who cares? I'm glad I went through that experience. I'm glad I found out who this person really was. I'm glad that my trying to prove that she wasn't this person, that she just had an avoidant attachment style or a fearful attachment style and wasn't this person. It just triggered trauma and needed therapy. I'm glad that I did that because it ended up just proving who she really was. And these people will not give you closure. You have to find closure in yourself. They won't. Like I said, she said that she was willing to go to therapy to clear the air finally after stonewalling me for months. And I would send her an email about once a month and, trying to explain. And it wasn't even about like trying to prove that I'm someone I'm not, because I don't care about that. Honestly, if people think I'm someone I'm not, screw them. Right? Why would you care? Like they can't wrap their minds around the nuances of life. Right? So in that case, those people you don't need in your life. There's plenty of people out there that get it, that understand it, that are growing, evolving, and not just stuck in a self-esteem stage, right? There are plenty of other people that are in the self-actualization stage that are yellow on the spiral dynamics level that are moving forward, right? Now, yes, they may only be 1% of the population, but 1% of 340 million in the US, still a lot of people. So just to keep in mind. The other reason I'm glad I've been through this is because I've been able to help other people who have been through similar situations. I have a friend of mine who was married for many years. I want to say something like 20 years to someone like this. And it's so confusing for him. And I was able to explain what was going on. I was like, you have to remember that these people have little to no self-awareness. You have to remember that these people are stuck in the self-esteem stage, the esteem stage. They will never get to self-actualization. They are emotional vampires, all right? Literally have all the traits of a vampire. That's really what it is. And they will take any excuse to pick apart anything you did wrong. For example, she brought up at one point he had, I think, backed into something and broken a taillight. And like he'd replaced it and all that stuff, like a normal thing that sometimes happens. And she was trying to hold that over his head in some way that made, in her mind, him feel not reliable or something, or someone he's not. I mean, this is the level of complete crazy town that you live in if you're with someone like that over time. And it's just not worth it. It's not worth your time. They're never going to change, most likely, unfortunately. While theoretically they can change, I have not found one documented case of that happening. And if anyone has one, please share. That would give some hope for this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, man, these people are not worth being in a relationship with. They're not relationship material. And I'm talking for friendships, for romantic partnerships, for anything like this. You just can't do it. It's only going to tear down your own emotional health. And I see it. I see it in other people that have gone through this. And I see it in myself. And yes, both he and I had a long healing journey. I can only imagine what it would have been like to live with someone like that for 20 years through liver transplant, stuff like that, right? We're talking a man who, well, it doesn't matter if he's a man or a woman. We're talking about a human being who stuck by this other human being through literally thick and thin, good and bad, for better or for worse, marriage vows, whole 9 yards. And this is what they're left with. Now, it's not wasted time. He learned valuable lessons, and he knows that. But now there's, of course, hypervigilance there, looking for that in other people. But at least he's able to identify it when it's really there and not fall into that trap again. Which, yeah, I mean, hypervigilance is something I deal with too.
There's been several times, Rachel will say or do something that throws off those internal red flags, right? But I'm able to step outside of that, as is he, and look at that objectively and say, okay, this is not a pattern. This is due to XYZ from her past. Let's work through that and move forward in whatever way that is. But let's do it in a healthy way. And I think that's the key.
At the end of the day, you have to remember that these people are not self-aware. Self-aware has 2 stages. The first one, which is very hard, is having insight into yourself. And of course, we all have our blind spots. I know I do. The second stage, which is even harder, is to be able to step outside of yourself and view yourself as an object interacting in the world around you and how you impact the world around you. That is very hard. And studies are showing that only 10 to 15% of people are truly self-aware, while 95% of people think they're self-aware. And how do you know if you're self-aware or not? Psychological assessments. There's a lot of psychological assessments out there that assess the same type of things. And there are a lot of real psychological assessments out there that if you take them through therapy or something like that, there are factors on the back end that you won't see that tell your therapist roughly the percentage of probability that you are either trying to manipulate the test or lying. So this is how you know if you're truly self-aware or not. It takes some time. It does take time. And it takes some money because therapy isn't free, usually. So I just find it an investment and much better to know. I am a person, if you've listened to this podcast, I clearly have an incessant need not just to know things, but to know how things work and to understand humans. Because I love technology. I love working on my car. I love a bunch of different things. I like construction. I like cabinetry. I like all this stuff. But that really doesn't change that much. Humans, to me, are endlessly fascinating because you could figure out a person pretty well in a snapshot of their life and now grow with that person, right? That's where the fulfillment and the joy and the things that make life worth living really live, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's break down what discarding is and what it isn't before diving into why it happens across the different disorders. What it is: a sudden, often cold terminations of a relationship or connection, usually after an intense period of idealization. Discarding can come with little to no explanation, and the person doing the discarding may act as if the relationship never mattered to them. What discarding isn't: a natural or mutual end to a relationship where both parties agree to part ways after discussing their differences. It also isn't the same as taking time away from a relationship to reassess or heal. This is something else. If you need time away from someone to recharge and reconnect and think about your thoughts and your feelings, which I absolutely have done and other partners have done with me, it is a necessary step. Tell them that. Do not say you need space. Don't tell them that. Tell them you need time away. When someone says they need space, really often what they mean is, I need time to make sure that I don't look like an a-hole to my friends and that I look like the victim. And so I am going to spread rumors. I'm going to overhype and overblow things. I'm going to hint that things got physical or that things got emotionally abusive or some crazy, ridiculous, completely unprovable and unobservable crap like that, when you can prove, especially through psychological assessments, therapy, and all that stuff, that you are not that person. You did not do what they think you did. Yeah, your intentions were not what they were thinking. Yeah, and they'll even feign fear. I mean, it's harmful, especially as a veteran. And I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I'm going to allow myself to do this. As a veteran who has been in multiple tours, in combat locations, knows exactly where their switch is, exactly how to turn it on and how to turn it off. It's very insulting and disruptive because you're like, you're a normal, healthy individual, at least somewhat healthy, right? I mean, we all have our issues, but at least you've worked through them, right? And it's very emotionally and cognitively disruptive because you're thinking, oh crap, like I know about veterans that have freaked out. I know about veterans that have snapped, right? Am I that veteran? Like, am I going to do that someday? Yeah, it took me a long time to finally realize, okay, no. And it was not only my therapist telling me this and my psychiatrist telling me this, but also AI. AI can look at things that are way broader and more in depth than any human ever possibly could. And when you throw in all of your results from your professional assessments, your self-assessments, even your handwriting and signature analysis, which AI is very good at doing, even though, yes, I get that pseudoscience, and have it do an in-depth personality profile on you based on what you're doing, and then ask it, and make sure you don't bias it, ask it, based on my personality profile, based on what you know about me, what are the chances that I would ever strike a partner? And if so, please give me those odds. If there are any factors that in my personality profile that would make it a reason I would strike a partner or something I need to be cautious about, please don't sugarcoat that. Please dig right into the negatives. If there are any, I can take it, right? Literally talk to it like a person, and it will lay it all out. And it did. It laid out all the reasons why I would never do that. And the probability of me doing that, it said, was so low that it would have a hard time calculating it, but it was well under 1%, because most veterans that freak out and snap, they have low insight. Okay. They're not self-aware usually, and they often have low education. These are factors, and AI knows this because it knows everything pretty much, although it can still hallucinate. You know, you got to, as far as when it comes to research and all that stuff, it'll just make up research. So it doesn't do it all the time, but it's getting much better at not doing it, but it still happens. So anyways, let's get back on track. Okay. So again, what discarding is: a sudden, often cold termination of a relationship or connection, usually after an intense period of idealization. Discarding can come with little to no explanation, and the person doing the discarding may act as if the relationship never mattered to them. What it isn't: a natural or mutual end to a relationship where both parties agree to part ways after discussing their differences. I've had this happen. It's the way it goes. You don't align. You know, you got to move on. You both still love each other. You both still care about each other. If things align in the future, you're open to reconnecting. But this happens. This is part of being an adult, part of being a messy human, and just part of life. It doesn't mean that they all end, though. They only all end if you're the problem. It also isn't the same as taking time away from a relationship to reassess or heal. Why people discard. The reasons for discarding can vary significantly based on the specific disorder or traits the person may have. Here's how the motivation for discarding differs across various types of cluster B personality disorders. I've changed the names to focus on the core aspects of each, as there's a ton of misinformation and confusion out there surrounding cluster B. Remember, discarding behavior is often related to specific disorders, but not everyone with those traits will necessarily engage in this behavior. In other words, not everyone who's cluster B will discard people. But if someone is discarding someone, it's very likely they have a lot of cluster B traits. Whether they're diagnosed or not, it's just kind of how it goes. Because again, normal, healthy people do not do this. Discarding in a relationship is not a normal, healthy, emotionally intelligent behavior. So if someone does this, just know, no matter how hard it is to internalize, you dodged a massive bullet and years of emotional exhaustion, misery, and dealing with an emotionally stunted individual. And whatever you do, do not let them back in now that they showed their ass. The only caveat is if they can prove they are committed to working on themselves lifelong and have been doing so for years. But I still wouldn't recommend it. It's just not worth it when there are so many healthy, emotionally intelligent people out there. Don't be a sacrificial lamb for someone else's problems. So, let's look at why each person or each disorder discards. IDD, impulsive disregard disorder, or ASPD. Those with IDD discard others with little emotional attachment or remorse. They may see relationships as tools or stepping stones for their personal gain, so when a relationship no longer serves their needs, they swiftly cut ties. Discarding them allows to avoid consequences or the work required to maintain connections. extreme self-focus disorder, or NPD. People with ESFD discard when their partner no longer provides the admiration, validation, or praise they crave. Sound familiar? They are deeply invested in maintaining an image of perfection, so when a partner begins to see that mask or challenges it, the discard comes swiftly. The individual may feel the need to eliminate anyone who threatens their grandiose self-image. EID, or Emotional Intensity Disorder, BPD. With EID, discarding often occurs due to an intense fear of rejection or abandonment. The person may abruptly end the relationship to avoid being abandoned themselves. And the irony is that if you wouldn't have abandoned them, again, they did it to themselves. They may perceive even minor slights as major betrayals, triggering an impulsive emotional reaction to cut the person out of their life. The emotional storm can lead them to act out of desperation rather than logic. DASD, or Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, HPD. For those with DASD, discarding is often a way to create drama or draw attention back to themselves. They may end relationships suddenly, only to attempt to re-enter them later, a cycle known as hoovering. Discarding provides them with an opportunity to become the center of attention again, either through the dramatic exit or the emotional response they provoke in the other person. The aftermath of discarding. Discarding can leave the discarded individual feeling deeply wounded. Often, they're left wondering what went wrong, questioning their self-worth, and struggling to process the abrupt loss. The manipulative nature of the discard makes it particularly painful because it often follows a period of intense idealization where the discarded person was placed on a pedestal and made to feel irreplaceable. For those with cluster B traits, discarding may not come with the same emotional weight. In fact, some may move on quickly to new relationships, continuing the cycle of idealization and discard without taking the time to reflect on the damage caused. So, as an aside, in my case, I moved on. Well, I didn't move on quickly, actually. It was over a year in intense EMDR therapy. But I did get into another relationship fairly quickly because there was a woman that I'd known. She'd met me. We'd talked. She was interested in being another partner because I am polyamorous. And the last person that I was with said they were, but they said solo polyamory, which gives me pause. But anyways, because once I looked that up, I was like, oh, you're basically just single. Just say you're single. Say you're single. It's okay to be single. And the problem is, if you do label yourself like that, be very careful because it does tend to attract people who have an insecure attachment style, who have cluster B traits. Like, it's a great excuse for them, right? It's a great excuse for them to never commit. It's a great excuse for themselves internally that their relationships always end, because they're solo poly, right? Yeah, no, screw that. Screw that. Be an adult. Don't hide behind a label. But anyways, she had reached out. She had got my number off a friend and reached out, and her text to me, which I still have because I don't delete texts usually. The last person I was with, that's the only time I've ever deleted text threads because I couldn't. I was trying to move forward, and I was actually truly in love with this person and loved her and was pheromonally attracted to her, like the trifecta, which I'd never have had happen in my entire life. So that was rough. So I was trying desperately to wipe the slate clean and try to move forward, and it just didn't work. Like, I had to get into intensive therapy to move past it. But like I said, I'm glad I went through it. It delayed my own emotional codependence healing after my partner died. It delayed it a lot, but both my Rachel and my other partner, Charlene, at the time, were definitely normal, healthy people who were evolved. So they were willing to hold space for that. They understood where that was coming from. Rachel and I went to therapy together a couple of times because we were having some communication issues. And my therapist said it brilliantly. She was like, Rachel, getting Daniel to communicate on your emotional level is like trying to get a blind guy to see the color red. It's not going to happen. And she's like, at the same time, Daniel, you need to not hit her with so many data and facts because she doesn't work that way. Okay, our communication skyrocketed after that. So it already was above average, but because we're both those types of people, she committed to a guy for 10 years, her husband, who unfortunately died of a stroke, and she took care of him at least the last 4 years, if not longer. And she never cheated on him, as far as I know, and as far as she's told me, which I do believe her. I've been with her for over 2 years now. No, not quite 2 years. I think it'll be 2 years in November 17th. So, yeah, I mean, I told the last person she was worth it. Clearly she wasn't. I thought she was, but Rachel is definitely worth it because she's proven herself. She's proven herself time and time again, as have I. So it's a good thing. Anyways, and she's in her own therapy, so it's good. Therapist isn't a bad thing. Like, you can be the most emotionally mature, stable individual, and it's still good to see a therapist at least every, once a month or two, just to make sure everything's good, just to make sure you're not slipping back into any old habits or, any, I don't know, self-destructive thought processes or whatever, it's good. It's good. So, like I said, especially since 10 to 15% of people have self-awareness and the rest don't, but they think they do. That's terrifying. Anyways. All right, I'm done with the tangents. Gonna keep going. So again, those with DASD, discarding is often a way to create drama or draw attention back to themselves. That's histrionic personality disorder. The aftermath of discarding. Discarding can leave the discarded individual feeling deeply wounded. Often, they're left wondering what went wrong, questioning their self-worth, and struggling to process the abrupt loss. The manipulative nature of the discard makes it particularly painful because it often follows a period of intense idealization where the discarded person was placed on a pedestal and made to feel irreplaceable. Now, I definitely wasn't made to feel irreplaceable, but I mean, yeah, there was a lot. It was a lot. For those with cluster B traits, discarding may not come with the same emotional weight. In fact, some may move on quickly to new relationships, continuing the cycle of idealization and discard without taking the time to reflect on the damage caused. Understanding this pattern is crucial for anyone involved with someone who has cluster B traits. Recognizing the signs early on can help prevent deeper emotional harm and allow for healthier boundaries, or even in some cases, barriers to be set. Intense emotional reactions. The why of things. Part 3 of 15. Emotionally intelligent people experience intense emotions, but regulate them in a healthy way. This makes it incredibly confusing when someone reacts in extreme, unpredictable ways without warning or proportionality. For example, clap on the back. Oh, you might beat me up someday. What? Oof. Emotional intensity is a hallmark of many cluster B disorders, but it's important to understand that the why behind these reactions can differ depending on the specific traits or disorder involved. Emotional outbursts, volatility, or dramatic mood swings may seem overwhelming or irrational to those on the receiving end, but to the person experiencing them, these emotions can feel all-consuming and completely justified in the moment. What it is. Sudden, overwhelming emotional responses to situations, often disproportionate to the actual event or trigger. This can include extreme anger, sadness, jealousy, or excitement, sometimes switching rapidly between these states. What it isn't. Normal emotional reactions to stressful or upsetting situations. Everyone has bad days or moments when they're more reactive. But for people with cluster B traits, these reactions are frequent, intense, and often difficult to regulate. Why these people have intense emotional reactions. Let's break down how these reactions manifest and what drives them in different types of cluster B disorders. IDD, impulsive disregard disorder. For those with IDD, intense emotional reactions are often sparked by a threat to their control or sense of dominance. When things don't go their way, their frustration can escalate quickly, leading to explosive anger or outbursts. These reactions are less about feeling deeply and more about maintaining their hold on the situation or manipulating others into compliance. With ESFD, intense emotional reactions from someone with ESFD or NPD usually occur when their grandiose self-image is challenged or threatened. She got embarrassed in front of her friends, her image was threatened because she had put on a show that day. There you go. I mean, pretty cut and dried once I realized what was really going on. My therapist tried to clue me in, and I was in denial for a long time, but I finally had to accept, oh yeah, okay. All right, she is that person. Even minor criticisms or perceived slights can provoke an extreme response because they struggle to tolerate anything that undermines their sense of superiority. The intensity comes from their deep-seated need to protect their fragile ego at all costs. Makes sense. EID, or emotional intensity disorder, or BPD. Individuals with EID are known for their emotional volatility. Their intense emotional reactions can stem from a deep fear of abandonment, feelings of inadequacy, or sudden shifts in how they view others and themselves. Emotions can change on a dime, from extreme adoration to intense hatred, making relationships with these individuals feel like an emotional roller coaster. They may not always recognize how their reactions affect others, as their own emotions are so overwhelming in the moment. Again, if any of you guys have been on the receiving end of this, just know, get away from that person. Do not let them back in. Do not let them hoover you back in. Do not let them back in your life, period. All right? These people are going to continue to do it again. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time before they do it again. Don't even go there. That's my advice. You do what you want. I'm telling you, your life's going to suck if you stay with those kinds of people. That's not what normal people do. DASD, Traumatic Attention Seeking Disorder, or HPD. In DASD, intense emotional reactions are often a way to draw attention back to themselves. Whether it's a dramatic display of affection, anger, or sadness, the goal is often to remain at the center of the emotional scene. These reactions are designed to keep others engaged, ensuring that the focus remains on them, regardless of the actual issue at hand. The aftermath of intense emotional reactions. These emotional outbursts can leave those on the receiving end feeling confused, drained, or even manipulated. It's challenging to maintain a sense of stability or predictability in relationships with someone prone to intense emotional swings. One moment, they may seem fully invested in the relationship, and the next, they're lashing out in anger or retreating into silence. For the person exhibiting these behaviors, the intensity of their emotions can feel justified, even if it's disproportionate to the situation. However, it often leads to a cycle of guilt and shame afterwards, which can make the next outburst feel even more unavoidable. Recognizing these patterns early and setting boundaries around emotional reactions can help protect your well-being and create space for healthier dynamics. Difficulty with or incapability of emotional empathy, or intelligent empathy. The why of things, part 4 of 15. Empathy is a fundamental part of healthy relationships. Most people naturally express both emotional and logical empathy, which makes it hard to understand when someone seems incapable of caring about others' feelings. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. For many people with cluster B traits, this capacity can be severely limited or even non-existent. They may struggle to grasp the emotions and needs of others, not out of malice, but because their internal world is so all-consuming that they can't look beyond themselves. So, for example, the person I got with, one of my first red flags, when I told her about my partner's death, she was like, "Oh, are you okay to be in another relationship?" Yeah, because it was all about her, right? That's what it was about. When we, at the end, when she was doing her thing, she said, I'm afraid you're going to walk out the door and I'll never see you again. And I was like, no, I'm here. Like, I'm not going anywhere. And she ran up to me and gave me a big hug and started crying. And then, of course, me being me and emotionally codependent at the time and feeling her pain and being like, what have I done? Like, she is damaged. Like, what the hell? I need to get her some help. I started crying too, She could not feel any of my emotions. She just couldn't feel that. So it's little wonder that she did what she did. I mean, if you can't feel someone else's pain for you, what? Like, the human species would be gone if even half of us were like that, So yeah, it makes it very confusing, and it makes it very challenging to recognize and to figure out what's going on. And hey, anyone out there that has been through that, man, I get it now. I get it. I understood it logically. I never got it emotionally before. And I get how confusing that is. That is insanely ridiculous. But you got to remember, again, this is not a normal, healthy person. This is a person who is completely damaged. They've been broken by other people, or their parents failed them. Whatever reason it is, the only people that can heal them is them. You can give them the tools, but I mean, if you really want to stick it out and they're really, truly committed, then you can go to therapy with them. Tried to do that with her. She wouldn't do it other than to clear the air after, 4 or 6 months of trying to get her to, I think I sent her 3 or 4 emails over 4 to 6 months. Can't remember the timeline. It's been a while. It's been a couple years. Everything about our relationship is stuck in my head, though, because that's what that's what that'll do to you. Ugh. It was very foggy at the time, and now I know why. Because I was going through acute PTSD. Definitely not the same as combat PTSD at all, but still, still stress disorder. Anyways, all right, where was I? Oh, yeah. However, the reasons for this lack of empathy can differ across the various disorders. The lack of empathy, what it is. A difficulty in recognizing or caring about the emotions, needs, or perspectives of others. This may manifest as a lack of concern for how one's actions affect others, or an inability to put oneself in someone else's shoes, whether emotionally or logically. What it isn't. Occasionally failing to understand someone else's point of view. Everyone has moments where they miss social cues or struggle to relate to others' emotions, but for individuals with cluster B traits, this lack of empathy is more pervasive and often intentional. Emotional versus logical empathy. Before diving into how empathy issues manifest in different disorders, it's important to distinguish between emotional empathy and logical empathy. Emotional empathy is the ability to feel what someone else is feeling. It's the gut-level understanding of another's emotional state. People who struggle with this type of empathy may appear cold, detached, or indifferent, even when others are clearly suffering. Logical empathy is the ability to intellectually understand someone else's emotions, even if you don't feel them yourself. While it's not as emotionally connected, logical empathy can still help guide appropriate responses to someone's needs. Those who lack even logical empathy often seem confused or indifferent in situations that require compassion or support. Why these people struggle with empathy. Let's explore why people with different cluster B disorders may have trouble with empathy. In IDD, they often lack both emotional and logical empathy. Their focus is entirely on their own needs, goals, and desires, and they see others as tools to be used rather than people with feelings. Empathy doesn't fit into their worldview because they simply don't care how others feel, unless it directly impacts their own interests. This emotional disconnect makes it easy for them to manipulate or harm others without guilt or remorse. ESFD or NPD. With ESFD, the lack of empathy is largely due to their inflated self-image. They're so consumed with their own perfection and superiority that they fail to recognize others' emotional states. They may have moments of logical empathy where they understand intellectually that someone is hurt or upset, but because they see themselves as more important, they often dismiss or downplay others' feelings. Their emotional empathy, however, is often severely impaired. They may act empathetically when it benefits their image, but it rarely comes from a genuine place of concern. EID, or Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD, by Borderline Personality Disorder, those with EID often experience difficulty with empathy not because they don't care, but because their own emotions are so overwhelming that they can't make space for others' feelings. Their emotional empathy may fluctuate dramatically. They may feel deeply connected to someone one moment, then completely shut off the next. Their difficulty with empathy tends to stem from emotional instability, not a lack of care, and they may regret their inability to empathize during emotional outbursts. In calmer moments, they might exhibit logical empathy, but struggle to act on it consistently. DASD, or Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, may seem to have emotional empathy when it suits their need for attention. They can be highly attuned to others' emotions if those emotions help them remain the center of attention. However, their empathy is often shallow, fleeting, and self-serving. They may engage in displays of compassion or concern, but it's typically to ensure that others continue to admire or focus on them. Logical empathy may be present, but it's often twisted to serve their need for validation rather than a genuine care for others. The impact of empathy deficits. When someone lacks empathy, whether emotional, logical, or both, it can create significant harm in their relationships. The inability to understand or care about the feelings of others leads to behaviors like manipulation, disregard for boundaries, and emotional cruelty. This is especially damaging because the person lacking empathy may not see the issue, leaving their partner or friend feeling deeply invalidated and emotionally isolated. And there you go. People that struggle with empathy they're the ones that manipulate. Normal, healthy people don't manipulate because they don't have to. In relationships, The absence of empathy often means the person with cluster B traits is primarily focused on their own needs and desires, leaving the other person feeling used or invisible. While those on the receiving end might try to explain their feelings, definitely did that, the lack of empathy makes it hard or impossible for the other party to even register the problem, let alone care enough to change. And there you go. Protecting yourself. Understanding that someone struggles with empathy or is incapable of it altogether is crucial for setting boundaries. It's important to accept that if someone isn't capable of caring for your emotional needs, no amount of explanation or effort on your part will make them start caring. Protecting your emotional health means recognizing this limitation and adjusting your expectations accordingly. Unstable self-image, the why of things, part 5 of 15. In healthy relationships, people tend to have a stable sense of self, even through difficult times. When someone's identity swings from one extreme to another, it can be deeply disorienting for those around them. One of the defining characteristics of cluster B personality disorders is an unstable or shifting sense of self. This means that individuals often struggle to maintain a consistent identity, leading to frequent changes in how they see themselves, and in turn, how they behave towards others. Their instability in this self-image can result in unpredictable, erratic behavior that leaves those around them feeling confused and unsure of where they stand. So, for example, there was one night I got a very weird text from this person I was with, and she was like, "Do you think I'm pretty?" And I was like, my mind immediately jumped to, being biased in this area, that some other person was telling them that they were ugly or slamming them on social media, right? And so I was immediately like, "I think you're beautiful, and that's all that matters." And she was like, "No, do you think I'm pretty in the face?" And I was like, all that matters to me is that I was like, I think you're beautiful. Like, I find you beautiful. That is all that matters. That's all that matters. And if anyone else says otherwise, they can fuck off, right? Now I know that's what was going on. So, yeah, it sucks. The instability in their self-image can result in unpredictable, erratic behaviors that leaves those around them feeling confused or unsure of where they stand. Unstable self-image, what it is: an inconsistent or fragmented sense of identity where the person's view of themselves shifts rapidly. This can involve changes in values, goals, appearance, and behavior depending on external validation, emotions, or circumstances. What it isn't: natural self-development over time, or occasional shifts in identity due to personal growth or life experiences. While everyone goes through phases of self-reflection and change, people with an unstable self-image experience more extreme, frequent shifts that can feel disorienting both for them and for others. Why these people have an unstable self-image. The reasons for this unstable sense of self vary based on the specific traits or disorder, but they generally revolve around the issues of validation, emotional regulation, and fear of rejection or abandonment. Let's explore how this manifests in different cluster B disorders. IDD, impulsive disregard disorder, ASPD. People with IDD tend to have a shallow sense of self. Their identity is often based on superficial things, status, control, or material success, and shifts based on their external environment. If their sense of power or dominance is threatened, they may react by radically changing their behavior or goals to reassert control. This instability is tied to their need for immediate gratification and a disregard for deeper emotional or moral foundations. ESFD, extreme self-focus disorder, or NPD. Individuals with ESFD may appear to have a stable self-image, as she did, but it's often fragile and heavily reliant on external validation. When others admire or praise them, they can feel invincible, but any challenge to their grandiose view of themselves can cause them to spiral into self-doubt or defensiveness. So again, the next day I'd asked her about that, and she was like, "Oh, I don't care, I'm over that. I just have," she literally told me she has periods where she does that. I was like, how did I not see this? But, oh well. Hey, emotional codependence will do that to you, man. Doesn't matter if you were a therapist or not, counselor or not, educated at a master's level or not, it'll do it. Their self-image shifts between feelings of superiority and inadequacy depending on how others respond to them. This instability can lead to drastic changes in behavior or appearance to maintain their facade of perfection. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. For those with EID, their self-image is often tied directly to their emotions, which can change rapidly and dramatically. They may feel confident and self-assured one day, only to be consumed by feelings of worthlessness the next. Their sense of self is often dependent on their relationships, and any perceived threat to those relationships can cause them to question their identity entirely. This can result in shifting values, appearance, or behavior as they try to stabilize their emotions and maintain a sense of self. DASD, or Dramatic Seeking Attention Disorder. With DASD, the unstable self-image revolves around their need to be the center of attention. Their identity is often fluid, changing based on what will gain them the most admiration or attention at any given moment. They may present themselves as confident and charismatic, only to swing to feelings of inadequacy if they're not receiving the validation they crave. This can lead to dramatic changes in behavior, appearance, or personality, all aimed at reclaiming the spotlight. The impact of an unstable self-image. Living with someone who has an unstable self-image can feel like navigating a constantly shifting landscape. One day, the person might be confident, focused, and pleasant, but the next, they might be insecure, erratic, or even hostile. This inconsistency often leaves those around them walking on eggshells, unsure of how the person will respond to any given situation. Which, I tell you what, if you have to walk on eggshells around a partner, get out, get out, get out. That is not someone you want to be with. This constant fluctuation of their identity can create a chaotic environment in relationships, as their values, interests, and even morals may shift depending on their emotional state or external validation. For the individual with an unstable self-image, these shifts can be exhausting. I mean, you can imagine they would probably be exhausting. They may struggle to maintain a consistent sense of self and of who they are, often feeling like they're losing themselves in the process. This lack of stability can lead to feelings of emptiness, self-doubt, and confusion about their place in the world. The search for a solid identity often drives them to seek external validation or engage in impulsive behaviors that only exacerbate their instability. Protecting yourself. When dealing with someone who has an unstable self-image, it's important to recognize that their fluctuating identity is not something you can fix or stabilize. Trying to anchor them to a consistent sense of self, as I did, is often a losing battle, as their identity is tied to deeper emotional and psychological issues. Setting clear boundaries around their behavior and ensuring that you don't lose your own sense of self in the process, I definitely did, got it back, but there you go, is crucial for maintaining emotional well-being. Impulsivity, the why of things, part 6 of 15. While emotionally intelligent people might make spontaneous decisions, they generally consider the consequences. It's bewildering when someone consistently acts on impulse, leaving chaos in their wake without regard for the fallout. Impulsivity is a key trait often found in individuals with cluster B personality disorder. It involves acting without forethought or consideration of the consequences, driven by emotional urges, desires, or immediate gratification. This behavior can manifest in reckless decisions, volatile reactions, and unpredictable actions that seem to come out of nowhere. Impulsivity creates a sense of instability, not only in the person exhibiting the behavior, but also in their relationships and interactions with others. Impulsivity, what it is: acting on sudden urges or emotions without considering the long-term consequences or risks. This can include behaviors like spending sprees, substance abuse, reckless driving, sudden relationship changes, or dangerous physical activities, like racing motorcycles. Interesting. Sound familiar? What it isn't: spontaneity or making quick decisions after considering the potential outcomes. Impulsivity is reactive and often harmful, whereas spontaneity can be positive when approached with a sense of balance and responsibility. Why these people act impulsively. Impulsivity often serves as a coping mechanism for dealing with emotional distress or a way to gain immediate satisfaction. So, for example, my last person, her housemate, I don't want to get into too many details, her housemate abandoned her for another woman during the pandemic, which is, now I get it. he doesn't have the training I did, but he probably saw there's something wrong. And of course, the last person I was with, she mentioned specifically that the girl, or the woman, I should say, that her housemate got with met her and doesn't like her. Well, yeah, duh. She probably saw through everything, you know? It's probably what happened. But they're still living together as far as I know. So, you know, because of course they are, because he's paying half the rent and he has a truck and she gets to use it for strongman competitions. That's how these people work, man. Like, she makes the money to pay for it herself, but, you know, she's getting validation and supply from him. So why would it change? And that's how it goes. Because she did mention even her own friends found it weird, as did I. I just assumed that she was that evolved, right? Wow, you're so evolved that someone can abandon you. You can try to get them back for months, which is what she did. And she told me that. And then you can still live with them and like totally be fine. That's a really evolved person, right? Yeah, it would be, but that's not her, unfortunately. This is tough for me to record and write and all that stuff, because it does bring up a lot of stuff for me, but we're getting through this. Here's how impulsivity shows up across different cluster B disorders. IDD, or impulsive disregard disorder, ASPD. For those with IDD, impulsivity often stems from their need for control and immediate gratification. They may make reckless decisions that disregard the safety or well-being of others, acting on urges that satisfy their desires in the moment. Whether it's engaging in dangerous activities, manipulation, or illegal behavior, their impulsivity is usually driven by a disregard for rules, boundaries, and consequences. The impulsive actions tend to be selfish, aimed at fulfilling their own needs, often at the expense of others. ESFD, extreme self-focus disorder, NPD. Impulsivity in individuals with ESFD is often tied to maintaining their grandiose self-image. They might make sudden decisions to buy lavish items, take bold risks, or end relationships that challenge their perceived superiority. So in her case, for example, she was getting into motorcycle racing because her housemate was a professional motorcycle racer. And I'm sure he was a very talented guy. He had a lot of trophies. She had the need to do that, right? But now, she was very careful, like almost to the point where it was weird because she was going around the track so slowly. And I was kind of thinking to myself, like, how long have you been doing this? But hey, you know, I mean, that's what these people do. So moving on. Their impulsivity can also manifest when they feel their ego is threatened. They may lash out, make drastic life changes, or seek immediate validation through risky behaviors. The goal is to reassert control over their own self-image and to regain admiration of power, often without considering the long-term consequences. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. For those with EID, impulsivity is directly linked to their fluctuating emotions. When they feel intense fear, anger, or sadness, they may act on those feelings in extreme ways, whether it's through reckless spending, self-harm, substance use, or rapidly changing relationships. Their impulsive actions may serve as a way to cope with emotional overwhelm, even though the behaviors can lead to more problems in the long run. They might deeply regret these actions later, but struggle to control the emotional impulses that drive them. DASD, or Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, HPD. Individuals with DASD often act impulsively to regain attention or create drama, whether it's making dramatic declarations, engaging in risky behaviors, or doing something outlandish. Their impulsivity is aimed at pulling focus back to themselves. The impulsivity is often more performative, with the goal of creating a spectacle or evoking strong reactions from those around them. They may not fully understand the negative consequences of their actions, as their primary concern is staying in the spotlight. The impact of impulsivity. Impulsive behavior can wreak havoc on relationships, finances, careers, and personal well-being. For those in close relationships with individuals who are impulsive, this unpredictability can lead to a constant state of anxiety, as you never know what they might do next. Their impulsive decisions can create chaos, leading to broken commitments, unexpected financial burdens, or sudden changes in the dynamics of the relationship. For the person exhibiting impulsivity, the immediate relief or satisfaction gained from acting on a whim is often short-lived. In the aftermath, they may face consequences that can range from damaged relationships to financial problems, legal issues, or health risks. However, their emotional state or sense of entitlement often blinds them to these risks in the moment, making it difficult for them to break the cycle of impulsive behavior. Protecting yourself. When dealing with someone prone to impulsivity, it's important to set clear boundaries around how their behavior affects you. This might involve limiting your financial or emotional involvement in their decisions or creating space where their actions become too erratic or damaging. It's also essential to recognize that their impulsive actions are not your responsibility, and you cannot control or predict their behavior. Fear of abandonment, the why of things, part 7 of 15. Most people in healthy relationships trust that distance or conflict won't lead to abandonment. When someone constantly fears being left and reacts to that fear in extreme ways, it can be difficult to navigate and understand. Fear of abandonment is a core issue for many individuals with cluster B traits, and it can drive a range of destructive behaviors. This fear often leads to patterns of clinging to relationships, or pushing people away, or engaging in dramatic actions to prevent perceived rejection. It's important to recognize that while this fear can feel irrational from the outside, for the person experiencing it, it's deeply rooted in emotional pain, insecurity, and past trauma. What it is: an overwhelming fear that loved ones will leave, abandon, or reject them. This fear can manifest in unhealthy ways, including extreme emotional reactions, attempts to control the relationship, or self-sabotaging behaviors to preemptively end relationships before they feel abandoned. What it isn't: normal concern about losing a relationship due to conflicts or disagreements. While everyone experiences fear of rejection at some level, the fear of abandonment in cluster B individuals is excessive, persistent, and often based on imagined or exaggerated scenarios. Why these people fear abandonment. The fear of abandonment stems from deep-seated emotional wounds and insecurity. The person often feels unworthy of love or attention, so any sign of disconnection triggers panic. Let's explore how this fear manifests in different cluster B disorders. IDD, Impulsive Disregard Disorder, or ASPD. Although individuals with IDD may appear indifferent or even dismissive, they can experience a hidden fear of abandonment. This fear can manifest in attempts to maintain control over the relationship through manipulation, isolation, or impulsive behaviors. Rather than appearing needy or anxious, they might preemptively abandon others or sabotage relationships to avoid the vulnerability of being left. Their fear of abandonment is often masked by a facade of emotional detachment or power. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. For those with ESFD, fear of abandonment is intricately tied to their need for admiration and validation. They may fear losing their supply of attention and adoration, which can make them behave in controlling or manipulative ways to keep people close. If they sense that someone might be losing interest or challenging their sense of superiority, they may discard that person first to avoid feeling abandoned themselves. They need constant reinforcement of their worth, and any perceived threat to that can cause them to lash out or cling tightly. So, for example, with the last one, after she said she needed space, I woke up at like 2 a.m. Obviously, with that emotional codependence, I was feeling like she was pulling away. And especially with what I'd seen, I was afraid that that clap on the back and everything that happened afterwards with what she was going through and what she was feeling and the conversation that we had would lead to her pulling away needlessly, right? So we had met on Field. She had matched me first. It was the only time I had gotten on a dating app actually looking for something real. And I laid all of that out in my profile and laid out that I had lost my partner, the whole 9 yards, said that I knew that I wouldn't be able to find someone like that again. And I wasn't looking for someone to replace her. I was looking for someone to share my life with, since I was very fortunate enough to be able to retire at 39 and have my house built and all of that stuff. So I was looking for someone to share my life with, right? Because it's much easier for me to be alone than it is in relationships. It takes a lot of work for me to be in a relationship. But I also know that if you want to maximize fulfillment, there's an 85-year study that's going on. It's a longitudinal study. To maximize human happiness, you need solid connections. That's friendships, family, and romantic partners. That is how you maximize your happiness and live longer. And the research is showing this. So anyways, I got back on the Field dating app. I had not deleted my profile because I kind of suspected that she was a little bit fearful about that stuff. So I left my profile up, you can see how many days it had been since the person was on there. So I started getting in my head, and I went on there, and sure enough, she had been on there that day. So I screenshotted a video of it, and I sent it to her friends, 4 people that I thought were her friends, and I sent it to her, obviously, because I wanted to be open and transparent. And I was hoping against hope that her friends would come back and say, this is crazy. You're just imagining things, like, this is fine. Their silence was deafening and telling. And of course, she went into rage mode, narcissistic rage mode, and abandoned me. And like I said, used the excuse that she was afraid that I was going to beat her up someday, which is insane. Her excuse for being back on the dating app was that she was rereading our texts. And I have 2 sisters. I reached out to them. I was like, is this a plausible excuse? Is this a plausible reason? And they both came back and they were like, no, if you want to save texts from someone on a dating app, you screenshot them so that you can read them later, so that you can reground yourself. So there you have it. It's a perfect example. So she was afraid that because I saw that, I would abandon her. And she preemptively did that first, which is a good thing, because I would have spent my life with that person. Probably would have eventually woken up to what was going on once my temporary emotional codependence was healed through therapy. But I am the kind of person that when things are going wrong in relationship, I double down, I try harder, and I'm more committed to making the relationship work, which is something that I'm working on having a better balance of, because obviously you can do that to your detriment. So anyways, moving on. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. Fear of abandonment is perhaps most pronounced in those with EID. Their emotions can swing from intense closeness and dependence to sudden panic and rage when they fear being left. This fear often leads to behaviors like clinging, checking it obsessively, or testing their partner's loyalty through dramatic gestures. They may also push people away in a defensive attempt to protect themselves from the inevitable rejection they fear. Their unstable self-image compounds this fear, making relationships feel like constant emotional tightropes. DASD, Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, or HPD. Individuals with DASD may fear abandonment because it means losing the attention and validation they thrive on. They may engage in dramatic actions, whether positive, love bombing, or negative, creating conflict, to keep others focused on them. The idea of being forgotten or ignored can trigger impulsive, attention-seeking behaviors, sometimes leading them to manipulate situations to regain the spotlight. Their fear of abandonment is not necessarily about losing love, but about losing the admiration and validation they crave. And again, a normal, healthy individual will not be getting back on a dating app when they're committed to making the relationship work. They won't get back on a dating app to see what else is out there, right? To see if they can monkey branch to someone else, and they'll stay with you if they can't. That is not normal human behavior. That is someone that has issues, and you need to bounce if that happens, because screw those people. You don't want someone that's not loyal in your life. The impact of fear of abandonment. Living with someone who has a deep fear of abandonment can feel exhausting and overwhelming. Their constant need for reassurance, combined with unpredictable emotional reactions, can make relationships unstable and volatile. This fear can create a push-pull dynamic in relationships where the individual alternates between intense closeness and pushing others away to avoid the pain of potential rejection. The emotional toll on partners or friends can be immense, leading to feelings of guilt, frustration, and confusion. For the person experiencing this fear, the thought of being abandoned can feel like an existential threat. Their emotional reactions are often disproportionate to the situation, and they may act impulsively to prevent the perceived abandonment, even if their actions actually push others away. This creates a vicious cycle where the fear of abandonment leads to behaviors that can sabotage the very relationships they're trying to protect. Protecting yourself. If you're involved with someone who has a deep fear of abandonment, it is important to set clear boundaries around emotional dependency. While it's natural to offer reassurance and support, you cannot be responsible for managing their fear. Encourage healthy communication and emotional regulation, but recognize when the behavior becomes harmful to your own well-being. It's also important to be aware that their fear may lead to manipulative tactics designed to keep you close, so maintaining a strong sense of self and clear limits is crucial. Difficulty with object constancy. Object constancy refers to the ability to maintain an emotional connection to someone even when they aren't physically present or when the relationship faces conflict or distance. For individuals with cluster B personality traits, there can be a significant struggle with object constancy, leading to extreme emotional reactions, especially during separations or arguments. When someone lacks object constancy, they may feel as if the person they care about has disappeared or abandoned them, even in minor moments of disconnection. What it is: difficulty maintaining a stable emotional connection to someone when they are not physically present, or when experiencing conflict or emotional distance. This can result in feelings of abandonment, extreme anger, or a sudden shift from love to hate. What it isn't: normal feelings of sadness, frustration, or loneliness when someone is physically absent or during relationship conflicts. People without issues with object constancy can still hold on to the knowledge that the relationship or bond remains intact despite temporary separations or disagreements. Why people struggle with object constancy. The lack of object constancy is often tied to emotional instability, fear of abandonment, and difficulty regulating emotions. For individuals with certain cluster B traits, the inability to hold on to a stable sense of connection can lead to dramatic shifts in how they perceive others, swinging from idealization to devaluation. Here's how this difficulty with object constancy manifests in different disorders. IDD, or Impulsive Disregard Disorder, ASPD. Those with IDD typically lack deep emotional bonds with others, so they may struggle with object constancy in a more indifferent way. When someone isn't present or useful to them, they may simply disregard or forget that person, acting as though the emotional connection never existed. Their focus is often on the immediate moments and their needs, which means relationships are frequently transactional rather than emotionally constant. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. Individuals with ESFD can experience difficulty with object constancy when their need for admiration and validation isn't being met. If someone they rely on for attention is absent or criticizes them, they may react by devaluing that person or feeling betrayed. Their self-image is fragile, and without a steady stream of praise, they can feel abandoned, leading to shifts in how they perceive and treat others. They often lack the ability to hold on to the idea that a person can still value them even when not physically present. IED, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. Object constancy issues are particularly intense in those with IED. Their emotional state is often highly reactive, and if they feel disconnected from someone they care about, they may experience extreme feelings of abandonment, anger, or despair. A person they adored just hours earlier may suddenly be perceived as untrustworthy or hurtful if they aren't physically present or if a conflict arises. This leads to a push-pull dynamic in relationships where they constantly need reassurance to feel secure, but may quickly turn against someone if they feel even a temporary disconnection. DASD, or Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, HPD. For those with DASD, the struggle with object constancy often revolves around their need for constant attention. When they're not in the spotlight, they may feel as though they are forgotten or insignificant, leading them to act out to regain attention. Their relationships are often built around immediate validation, and when that's not readily available, they may devalue or lash out at those who aren't providing the attention they crave. Without the ability to maintain a sense of connection during quiet moments, they may continuously seek out dramatic ways to re-engage. The impact of difficulty with object constancy. For those in relationships with individuals who struggle with object constancy, it can feel like being on a constant emotional roller coaster. When things are going well, the person may seem loving, connected, and fully engaged. But the moment there's a physical distance or disagreement, the emotional connection seems to vanish. This can lead to feelings of being loved one moment and despised the next, creating a chaotic and unstable relationship dynamic. For the individual struggling with object constancy, this lack of emotional continuity can be deeply distressing. They may feel abandoned, rejected, or forgotten even during brief separations, leading to emotional outbursts, clinginess, or sudden shifts in how they view their partner. This inability to hold on to a stable emotional connection often drives destructive behaviors in relationships as they constantly seek reassurance but are easily triggered by perceived slights or distance. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone who struggles with object constancy, it's important to recognize that their emotional reactions are often tied to their own insecurity, not your actions. Setting clear boundaries around communication and ensuring that you're not drawn into their emotional volatility is essential. It's also crucial to maintain your own emotional stability and avoid trying to constantly reinsure or fix their emotional state, as this can lead to codependency. Idealization and devaluation cycles. One of the most common and painful dynamics in relationships with individuals who exhibit cluster B traits is the cycle of idealization and devaluation. These cycles involve extreme emotional swings, where the person moves from putting their partner or friend on a pedestal, idealization, to tearing them down or dismissing their worth entirely, devaluation. This creates an intense push-pull effect, which can leave those on the receiving end feeling confused, emotionally drained, and insecure. What it is: a repeating pattern where someone initially views their partner or friend as perfect, wonderful, or without fault, idealization, only to later swing to the opposite extreme, seeing them as deeply flawed, worthless, or even harmful, devaluation. This cycle can happen rapidly or over time, and it may repeat endlessly in relationships. What it isn't: normal ups and downs in relationships. In healthy relationships, people acknowledge their partner's strengths and flaws without swinging to extremes. The idealization and devaluation cycle is marked by intense, black and white thinking with little room for nuance or balance. Why people engage in idealization and devaluation cycles. The cycle of idealization and devaluation often stems from issues with self-worth, fear of abandonment, and emotional instability. When someone with cluster B traits idealizes you, they see you as the answer to all their emotional needs. When those unrealistic expectations aren't met, they devalue you as a form of self-protection. Here's how these cycles manifest across different disorders. IDD, Impulsive Disregard Disorder, or ASPD. In individuals with IDD, idealization may occur when someone is useful to them, offering resources, status, or something they desire. They may temporarily view this person as invaluable. However, once the person is no longer useful or fails to meet their needs, they are quickly devalued and discarded. For people with IDD, idealization and devaluation are often transactional, driven by a focus on what they can gain rather than any deep emotional attachment. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focus Disorder, or NPD. Idealization in ESFD tends to be self-serving. They may idealize people who praise or admire them, seeing them as extensions of their own greatness. When the admiration falters or the person offers criticism, they are quickly devalued and dismissed as inferior. The cycle is driven by a fragile ego that relies on constant validation. Anyone who challenges their grandiose self-image is no longer useful and must be devalued to protect their inflated sense of self. IED, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. Idealization and devaluation cycles are particularly pronounced in EID. When someone with EID idealizes you, they may see you as perfect, the answer to their deep emotional needs. But because their emotions are so unstable, any perceived slight, no matter how minor, can lead to immediate devaluation. This can happen overnight, leaving the partner feeling blindsided. The cycle is driven by their intense fear of abandonment and unstable self-image. They often feel betrayed or let down when their unrealistic expectations aren't met, leading to rapid devaluation. DASD, or Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, HPD. In DASD, idealization occurs when someone provides attention or admiration, placing the person at the center of their emotional world. But as soon as the attention shifts away, or someone else enters the picture, the person may be devalued for no longer providing the spotlight. Their idealization is often performative, and their devaluation may occur when they feel ignored, overlooked, or outshone by someone else. They seek out relationships that keep them in the center of attention, And once that focus fades, so does their appreciation for that person. The impact of idealization and devaluation cycles. These cycles can be incredibly harmful to relationships, as the person on the receiving end often feels like they're constantly walking on a tightrope. One day they're praised and adored, and the next they're criticized and belittled. This emotional whiplash can create anxiety, insecurity, and a deep sense of confusion. People often feel as though they're constantly trying to meet impossible standards or win back the approval they once had. For the person engaging in these cycles, the constant shift between idealization and devaluation is exhausting and emotionally taxing. They may not fully understand why their feelings change so drastically, or why they can't seem to maintain a balanced view of others. Their black and white thinking leaves little room for the complexity of human relationships, and as a result, they may cycle through relationships rapidly, leaving a trail of emotional destruction. Protecting yourself. Recognizing the pattern of idealization and devaluation is the first step in protecting yourself from its harmful effects. It's important to understand that these shifts in perception are not about you. They're about the other person's emotional instability. Setting boundaries about how you will allow yourself to be treated and recognizing when you're being placed in an idealized or devalued position can help you maintain your own emotional stability. Ultimately, people stuck in these cycles need to address their internal struggles through therapy or self-work, and no amount of reassurance or effort on your part can fix this dynamic. Interpersonal exploitation. The why of things, part 10 of 15. In healthy, emotionally intelligent relationships, people value mutual respect, care, and fairness. Most people wouldn't dream of using others for personal gain, which is why encountering someone who engages in interpersonal exploitation can feel shocking and confusing. Interpersonal exploitation involves taking advantage of others for personal gain without regard for their feelings, boundaries, or well-being. For individuals with cluster B traits, relationships are often seen as transactional, where people are valued based on what they can provide rather than who they are. This kind of exploitation can range from subtle manipulation to overt selfishness, and it often leaves those on the receiving end feeling used, depleted, and disrespected. What it is: the act of using others for personal benefit, be it for resources, status, emotional support, or validation, with little to no consideration of the other person's needs or desires. Exploitation can take many forms, from financial manipulation to emotional coercion, and it often feels like the individual views people as tools or a means to an end. What it isn't: asking for help or support in a balanced, reciprocal relationship. In healthy dynamics, people naturally help each other, but there's a clear difference between genuine support and exploitation. In exploitation, the giving is one-sided, and the taker shows little regard for what they give in return or how their behavior impacts others. Why people exploit others. Exploitation often stems from a combination of entitlement, lack of empathy, and an unrelenting focus on personal gain. While the reasons for this behavior vary based on the specific disorder, the common thread is a disregard for the well-being of others in favor of satisfying their own needs. Here's how interpersonal exploitation manifests in different types of cluster B disorders. IDD, Impulsive Disregard Disorder, or ASPD. Individuals with IDD are often emotionally detached from others and see people as stepping stones to get what they want. They have little concern for the emotional or financial impact of their actions on others, and they are willing to manipulate or deceive if it serves their interests. For them, exploitation is often about control, power, or personal satisfaction, and they may not even see their behavior as wrong. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. In those with ESFD, exploitation is driven by a need to bolster their ego and maintain their grandiose self-image. They may surround themselves with people who admire and validate them, using these individuals to reinforce their sense of superiority. When someone no longer serves this purpose, whether they stop providing validation or challenge the person's self-image, they are often at least discarded, if not devalued. The exploitation is more emotional and relational, aimed at feeding their need for constant attention and admiration. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. People with EID may exploit others not out of malicious intent, but due to their own emotional needs and instability. They might drain others emotionally by constantly seeking reassurance, support, or validation. Because they experience such intense emotional states, they may not recognize how demanding or exploitative their behavior is. Their focus on their own emotional survival often blinds them to the toll their needs are taking on those around them. DASD, Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, or HPD. For individuals with DASD, exploitation often revolves around their need for attention and admiration. They may use others to stay in the spotlight, surrounding themselves with people who will give them constant praise or emotional support. When the attention wanes, they may move on to someone else who will provide it. Their exploitation is typically more performative, designed to keep the focus on them at all times, regardless of the impact on others. The impact of interpersonal exploitation. Being exploited in a relationship is emotionally draining and can leave you feeling used, unappreciated, and betrayed. The person doing the exploiting often does not recognize or care about the impact their actions have on others. Over time, this can erode trust, damage self-esteem, and lead to feelings of resentment or worthlessness in those on the receiving end. For the individual who engages in exploitation, relationships often feel transactional. They view others as resources rather than equal partners, and once they've taken what they need, they may discard the person or move on to the next. This lack of emotional investment can lead to a pattern of shallow, unstable relationships where real emotional connection is difficult to establish. Protecting yourself. If you find yourself in a relationship where you feel used or exploited, it's essential to recognize that this dynamic is not healthy or sustainable. Setting firm boundaries around what you will and won't tolerate is crucial. Recognize that relationships should be reciprocal, where both people give and receive in a balanced way. If the exploitation continues, despite your boundaries, it may be necessary to distance yourself from the relationship to protect your emotional and mental well-being. Need for external validation. The why of things. Part 11 of 15. In healthy, emotionally intelligent relationships, people find value in themselves and seek validation through mutual respect and understanding. When someone constantly craves external validation, it can be confusing because it contrasts sharply with how most people build self-esteem internally. External validation is the need for approval, admiration, or praise from others in order to feel worthy or valuable. While it is normal for everyone to appreciate positive feedback occasionally, individuals with certain cluster B traits often rely excessively on this validation to maintain their self-esteem and sense of self. Without a steady stream of external validation, they may feel worthless, invisible, or anxious, leading them to act in ways that demand attention and approval. What it is: a compulsive need for others to affirm one's worth or value, often at the expense of personal integrity or genuine connection. People who seek external validation may alter their behavior, manipulate situations, or engage in attention-seeking actions to gain the approval they desperately need. What it isn't: enjoying compliments or feedback in a balanced, healthy way. Emotionally secure individuals can appreciate praise without depending on it to feel good about themselves. They have an internal sense of self-worth that doesn't require constant affirmation from others. Why people seek external validation. The need for external validation is often rooted in insecurity, a fragile self-image, or a deep fear of rejection or abandonment. Because these individuals struggle to generate a stable sense of self-worth internally, they rely heavily on others to prop up their self-esteem. Here's how the need for external validation manifests in different cluster B disorders. IDD, Impulsive Disregard Disorder, or ASPD. People with IDD might seek external validation in more manipulative or exploitative ways. They may crave power, status, or attention, and will manipulate others into giving them that validation. It's not about admiration for them, but rather about control and dominance. If they are not recognized or appreciated as they want to be, they may lash out or discard those around them without hesitation. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. For those with ESFD, external validation is critical to maintaining their inflated self-image. They see themselves as superior, but they constantly need others to reinforce that belief. If they are not praised or admired, they may become angry, withdrawn, or lash out. Their self-esteem is like a balloon that deflates quickly without constant air, so they surround themselves with people who will continuously validate them. They often reject or discard anyone who criticizes or questions their superiority. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. People with EID may seek external validation as a way to soothe their deep emotional turmoil. Their unstable self-image and overwhelming emotions lead them to constantly search for reassurance from others. They may cling to compliments, attention, or affection as a way to stabilize their emotions. However, because their emotional state is so volatile, even small dips in validation can trigger extreme feelings of rejection, anger, or sadness. DASD, or Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, HPD. Those with DASD often seek external validation through dramatic or attention-grabbing behavior. They crave the spotlight and will go to great lengths to ensure that others are paying attention to them. Whether it's through extravagant gestures, exaggerated stories, or creating conflict, their goal is to maintain a constant stream of attention and praise. Without it, they may feel deeply insecure and become even more dramatic in their attempts to regain focus. The impact of needing external validation. When someone constantly seeks external validation, it can create exhausting and one-sided relationships. Friends, partners, and family members may feel drained by the constant need to reassure, praise, or uplift the person. Over time, the relationship may feel more like a performance or a duty than a mutual connection. For the person needing validation, the relentless search for approval can become an emotional burden. Because their self-esteem is dependent on others, they often feel anxious, insecure, or worthless when the external validation fades. This creates a vicious cycle where they continuously chase praise, admiration, or attention, only to feel empty again shortly after receiving it. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone who constantly seeks external validation, it's important to set boundaries around how much emotional energy you can give. While everyone appreciates occasional validation, you are not responsible for maintaining someone else's self-esteem. Encouraging them to seek self-worth internally through therapy, self-reflection, or personal growth can be helpful. If their behavior becomes too demanding or manipulative, it's important to prioritize your own well-being and recognize that their need for constant validation may not be something you can fulfill. Difficulty with accountability. The why of things, part 12 of 15. In emotionally intelligent relationships, people take responsibility for their actions and understand the importance of accountability. When someone avoids accountability or blames others for their mistakes, it can be deeply confusing and frustrating because it contradicts the behavior we typically expect in healthy relationships. Difficulty with accountability refers to an inability or unwillingness to take responsibility for one's actions, decisions, or mistakes. People who struggle with accountability often deflect blame, make excuses, or shift responsibility onto others to avoid confronting their own shortcomings. This can create a toxic dynamic in relationships, where the person never acknowledges their role in conflicts or issues, leaving those around them feeling unheard and invalidated. What it is: a consistent pattern of avoiding responsibility for one's actions, whether through deflection, denial, or projection of blame onto others. This may manifest as refusing to apologize, downplaying harmful behavior, or twisting situations to make oneself the victim. What it isn't: occasionally failing to live up to expectations or making a mistake. Healthy individuals can recognize their missteps, apologize, and work to make things right. A lack of accountability, on the other hand, is a chronic behavior pattern where responsibility is rarely, if ever, taken. Why people struggle with accountability. Difficulty with accountability often stems from an inability to handle criticism, protect a fragile ego, or avoid facing uncomfortable truths about oneself. The reasons for avoiding accountability differ depending on the individual's personality traits and underlying emotional struggles. Here's how difficulty with accountability manifests in different cluster B disorders. IDD, Impulsive Disregard Disorder, or ASPD. People with IDD often have little concern for the consequences of their actions and may not feel accountable to others at all. They may lie, manipulate, or blame others without remorse, viewing accountability as irrelevant because their focus is on achieving their own goals. When confronted, they may become hostile or dismissive, making it clear that they don't feel responsible for the impact of their behavior on others. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focus Disorder, or NPD. For those with ESFD, accepting accountability is a direct threat to their inflated self-image. They may see themselves as superior and faultless, so acknowledging mistakes or wrongdoings conflicts with the grandiose narrative they maintain about themselves. If criticized or called out, they may react with anger, deflect blame onto others, or offer shallow justifications. Their focus is on preserving their image at all costs, and accountability is seen as a weakness or flaw they cannot afford to admit. EID, Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. People with EID may struggle with accountability due to their emotional volatility and shifting perceptions of reality. In moments of intense emotion, they may genuinely believe they are the victim, and their perception of events may be clouded by their feelings. As a result, they may find it difficult to see their role in conflicts or issues. Afterward, when emotions settle, they may feel regret, but in the heat of the moment, accountability often escapes them. DASD, or Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, HPD. Individuals with DASD may avoid accountability because it detracts from the attention and admiration they crave. If something goes wrong, or if they are at fault, they may spin the narrative to cast themselves as the victim or hero, refusing to acknowledge their role in the problem. They may also deflect blame onto others to keep themselves in a positive light, ensuring that they remain the center of attention and admiration. The impact of avoiding accountability. When someone consistently refuses to take responsibility for their actions, it can lead to feelings of frustration, resentment, and powerlessness in those around them. The person on the receiving end may feel like they're constantly being blamed for things that aren't their fault, or that issues in the relationship are never resolved because one party refuses to acknowledge their role. This dynamic can lead to a breakdown in communication and trust, as the person avoiding accountability creates a toxic environment where growth and resolution are impossible. For the individual who struggles with accountability, avoiding responsibility may offer short-term relief from discomfort, but it ultimately stunts their emotional growth and damages their relationships. Without accountability, they cannot learn from their mistakes or make meaningful changes, leading to repeated patterns of conflict and failure in relationships and personal endeavors. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone who avoids accountability, it's important to set clear expectations for how conflicts should be addressed. Encourage open communication and stress the importance of owning one's actions, but recognize that change is unlikely unless the person is willing to face their behavior. Be mindful of situations where you're being unfairly blamed or manipulated into taking responsibility for things that aren't your fault. In some cases, it may be necessary to distance yourself from the relationship if the refusal to accept accountability leads to ongoing emotional harm or instability. Boundary violations. The why of things. Part 13 of 15. In emotionally healthy relationships, people respect each other's boundaries naturally, understanding that they are essential for mutual respect and trust. When someone consistently violates boundaries, it can feel deeply unsettling because it contradicts the basic respect we expect in relationships. Boundary violations occur when someone disregards or crosses the emotional, physical, or psychological limits set by another person. Boundaries are essential for healthy relationships as they establish guidelines for how we interact with one another. For individuals with cluster B traits, these boundaries are often ignored, pushed, or broken to suit their own needs, leading to manipulation, control, or emotional harm to those on the receiving end. What it is: a consistent pattern of disrespecting, ignoring, or overriding another person's boundaries, whether that's in terms of personal space, emotional needs, or relationship dynamics. Boundary violations often occur when the person seeks control, validation, or simply ignores the other person's autonomy. What it isn't: occasional misunderstandings or mistakes about someone's boundaries, which are typically followed by an apology and an adjustment. In healthy relationships, people recognize boundaries and if they inadvertently cross them, they correct their behavior. Why people violate boundaries. Boundary violations often come from a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, or a need for control. For people with cluster B traits, boundaries may feel like obstacles to their desires or an affront to their sense of importance. They may not see boundaries as necessary or valid, and in extreme cases may intentionally push against them to assert dominance or control. Here's how boundary violations manifest in different cluster B disorders. IDD, or Impulsive Disregard Disorder, ASPD. Individuals with IDD may violate boundaries because they view others as extensions of their own needs. They don't respect others' autonomy, often seeing people as tools for their own use. Whether it's ignoring someone's emotional needs, physically invading their space, or manipulating situations for their own benefit, boundary violations are frequent because they disregard the impact of their actions on others. ESFD, or Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. For those with ESFD, boundary violations occur when the other person's needs or boundaries conflict with their inflated self-image. They may feel entitled to ignore or override someone's boundaries because they see themselves as more important. If a boundary prevents them from getting the attention, admiration, or control they want, they are likely to push through it without concern for how it affects the other person. EID, or Emotional Intensity Disorder, BPD. People with EID may violate boundaries due to their intense emotional swings and fear of abandonment. When they feel emotionally overwhelmed or insecure, they may cling to others, invade personal space, or push for deeper emotional involvement without recognizing or respecting the other person's need for boundaries. Their fear of losing connection can drive them to cross lines in an attempt to keep the relationship intact, even if it causes harm. DASD, or Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, or HPD. Those with DASD often violate boundaries in their quest for attention and validation. If someone's boundaries prevent them from getting the focus they crave, they may disregard them altogether, pushing emotional, physical, or conversational boundaries to draw attention back to themselves. They might create drama, overstep in relationships, or push for intimacy or attention in ways that make the other person uncomfortable, all in the service of staying in the spotlight. The impact of boundary violations. When someone consistently violates boundaries, it can lead to feelings of frustration, fear, and helplessness for those on the receiving end. Over time, this pattern can erode trust, making it difficult for the person to feel safe or respected in the relationship. It also creates a power imbalance, where the person whose boundaries are being violated feels they have little control over their own life or decisions. For the person violating boundaries, these actions often lead to unstable, dysfunctional relationships. Because they fail to recognize or respect the autonomy of others, they may push people away or create toxic dynamics where conflict is constant. The inability to respect boundaries limits their capacity for deep, meaningful connections, as relationships become defined by control or emotional manipulation. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship where your boundaries are consistently being violated, it's essential to assert those boundaries clearly and firmly. Communicate your limits and make it known that violations are unacceptable. If the boundary violations persist despite your efforts, it's important to recognize that the other person may not be willing or able to respect your needs. In such cases, distancing yourself from the relationship may be necessary to protect your mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Emotional dysregulation. The why of things. Part 14 of 15. In emotionally healthy relationships, people can manage and regulate their emotions in ways that allow for constructive communication and conflict resolution. When someone has difficulty controlling their emotional responses, it creates confusion and instability for everyone around them, especially since most people have already developed the tools to regulate emotions from an early age. Emotional dysregulation refers to the inability to manage or control emotional responses in a way that is proportional to the situation at hand. People who struggle with this often react to minor triggers with intense emotions, such as anger, sadness, or fear. They may find it nearly impossible to calm down once they've been emotionally triggered, and their emotional reactions are often disproportionate to the actual situation. What it is: a pattern of extreme, volatile emotional responses that are difficult to control or moderate. Emotional dysregulation can result in outbursts of anger, overwhelming sadness, or even sudden euphoria, and often leaves the person struggling to return to a baseline emotional state. What it isn't: feeling upset, angry, or emotional in response to genuine challenges or stress. In healthy individuals, emotions may be intense, but are still manageable, and they can find ways to calm themselves down and think rationally after the initial wave of feeling passes. Why people struggle with emotional dysregulation. The root of emotional dysregulation is often an inability to process emotions in a healthy way. People with cluster B traits may have experienced early trauma, neglect, or emotional invalidation, which stunted their ability to develop healthy coping mechanisms. As a result, their emotions are like a storm that comes out of nowhere, and they may not have the skills to bring themselves back to calm waters. Here's how emotional dysregulation manifests in different cluster B disorders. IDD, or impulsive disregard disorder, ASPD. People with IDD often act on their emotions without thinking about the consequences. Their emotional dysregulation tends to manifest in explosive anger or impulsive decisions when they don't get what they want or feel like they've lost control. These intense emotional reactions are often tied to their need for dominance and power over others. ESFD, Extreme Self-Focused Disorder, or NPD. For those with ESFD, emotional dysregulation is triggered when their inflated sense of self is challenged or threatened. They may respond with rage, defensiveness, or emotional outbursts if they feel criticized, rejected, or not admired. Their inability to manage these emotional reactions stems from their fragile ego, which makes them highly sensitive to anything that could damage their self-image. EID, or Emotional Intensity Disorder, BPD, Emotional dysregulation is a core characteristic of EID, or BPD. Individuals with this disorder experience emotions intensely and have difficulty moderating their responses. They may go from feeling deep love to sudden rage or overwhelming sadness, often within a short span of time. Their emotional states are like a roller coaster, making it difficult for them to find balance. They often struggle to self-soothe or regain control once they've been triggered, leaving those around them feeling like they're constantly managing emotional crisis. DASD, or Dramatic Attention Seeking Disorder, or HPD. People with DASD often experience emotional dysregulation when they feel ignored or out of the spotlight. They may react with exaggerated emotions, crying, yelling, or even joyful outbursts in order to bring attention back to themselves. Their emotions can shift rapidly, depending on whether they're receiving the attention they crave, and their dysregulation is often tied to their need for validation and admiration. The impact of emotional dysregulation. When someone struggles with emotional dysregulation, their intense emotions can create a chaotic and unstable environment for those around them. Friends, partners, and family members may feel like they're walking on eggshells, never sure when the next emotional explosion will occur. The constant volatility makes it hard to communicate, resolve conflicts, or even feel safe in the relationship, as even minor issues can escalate into major emotional upheavals. For the person experiencing emotional dysregulation, life can feel like a constant emotional storm. They may regret their emotional outbursts later or feel ashamed of their inability to control their reactions, but in the moment, their emotions feel overwhelming and impossible to manage. Without healthy coping mechanisms, they often get stuck in a cycle of emotional highs and lows, unable to find a steady, balanced state. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone who struggles with emotional dysregulation, it's important to set boundaries about how their emotional outbursts affect you. Encourage them to seek professional help, such as therapy or emotional regulation skills training, but recognize that it's not your responsibility to manage their emotions. Protect your own emotional well-being by creating space when their reactions become overwhelming, and don't feel obligated to constantly placate or calm them. It's essential to remember that while you can offer support, they must take responsibility for managing their emotions. Attention-seeking behaviors. The why of things, part 15 of 15. In emotionally intelligent relationships, attention is shared naturally and reciprocally, with each person offering care and focus at appropriate times. When someone consistently seeks attention at the expense of others, it can feel exhausting and disorienting, especially since most people don't need constant validation to feel secure. Attention-seeking behaviors occur when someone goes out of their way to be the center of attention, often using dramatic, exaggerated, or manipulative actions to ensure all eyes are on them. This need for attention isn't just about enjoying the spotlight. It's about a deep-seated insecurity that drives them to constantly seek validation, admiration, or reassurance from others. For those on the receiving end, it can feel like they're constantly being pulled into someone else's emotional orbit with little room for their own needs or perspectives. What it is: a pattern of consistently trying to capture attention through dramatic outbursts, exaggerated stories, or manipulative behaviors. This might include creating conflict, playing the victim, or making grand gestures to ensure that others are focused on them. What it isn't: enjoying occasional attention or praise. Emotionally healthy people can appreciate being acknowledged or admired without needing it constantly. They can also recognize when it's someone else's turn to be in the spotlight and support that person without feeling threatened. Why people seek attention. Attention-seeking behaviors are often rooted in insecurity, a lack of self-worth, or an overwhelming need for validation. For individuals with cluster B traits, attention serves as a way to soothe their internal anxieties or bolster their self-image. Here's how attention-seeking behaviors manifest in different cluster B disorders. IDD, or impulsive disregard disorder, or ASPD. For those with IDD, our word for antisocial personality disorder, attention-seeking can be a form of manipulation or control. They might use dramatic or risky behaviors to capture attention, not because they need validation, but because they want to dominate the situation or assert power. Their need for attention is more about maintaining control over others, using the spotlight as a tool to manipulate or achieve their goals. ESFD, or extreme self-focused disorder, or NPD. People with ESFD seek attention to reinforce their grandiose self-image. They crave admiration and validation, and when they don't receive it, they may go to great lengths to draw attention back to themselves. This might include boasting, exaggerating achievements, or belittling others to maintain their superior position. Their need for attention is driven by their fragile ego, which requires constant feeding from external sources. EID, or Emotional Intensity Disorder, or BPD. Individuals with EID may engage in attention-seeking behaviors as a way to regulate their intense emotions. They often feel overwhelmed by their emotional states and seek reassurance, comfort, or validation from others to stabilize themselves. This can lead to clinginess, melodramatic reactions, or attempts to monopolize conversations or social situations. Their need for attention stems from a fear of abandonment or a desire to feel connected, even if their methods are disruptive. DASD, or Dramatic Attention-Seeking Disorder, or HPD. For those with DASD, attention-seeking is the core of their behavior. They constantly crave the spotlight and will do almost anything to keep it on themselves. Whether it's through exaggerated storytelling, creating unnecessary drama, or even provoking conflict, their goal is to remain the center of attention at all times. Their self-worth is deeply tied to how much attention they receive, And when they feel ignored or overlooked, they may escalate their behavior to regain focus. The impact of attention-seeking behaviors. Living with someone who constantly seeks attention can be exhausting. Their need for validation, admiration, or reassurance can dominate conversations, social events, and even personal interactions, leaving little space for others to express themselves. Over time, friends, partners, and family members may feel drained by the constant emotional demands, finding it difficult to maintain a balanced, reciprocal relationship. For the person engaging in attention-seeking behaviors, the constant search for validation often leads to shallow, unstable relationships. While they may initially draw people in with their charisma or dramatic flair, these relationships can quickly deteriorate as others become weary of always playing the supportive role. The inability to share attention or allow others their moment can lead to isolation as people pull away to protect their own emotional energy. Protecting yourself. If you're in a relationship with someone who consistently seeks attention, it's important to set boundaries around how much emotional energy you're willing to give. While it's natural to offer support and validation in any relationship, it should be balanced, with both parties feeling heard and valued. Encourage the person to seek professional help if their need for attention is affecting their relationships, but also recognize when it's time to distance yourself if their behavior becomes overwhelming or toxic. Your own emotional health should not be sacrificed to constantly fulfill someone else's need for attention. Why you can't be in a relationship with someone who manipulates. The education gap. One of the most frustrating aspects of being in a relationship with someone who manipulates or displays other traits from the cluster B spectrum is the sheer amount of emotional groundwork you would need to lay before any real progress could even begin. While emotionally intelligent, healthy people have already learned many fundamental lessons about empathy, accountability, and mutual respect, those who exhibit those traits often lack even the most basic understanding of these concepts. The real issue? You can't have an authentic reciprocal relationship because you would essentially be starting from square one, trying to explain what most people already understand by default. In emotionally intelligent relationships, the core principles like trust, respect, emotional regulation, and mutual support are almost innate. Both partners already grasp these concepts at a deep, fundamental level. They know, without needing an elaborate conversation, how to be considerate, how to empathize, how to be accountable, and how to handle conflict in a mature way. But when you're dealing with someone who manipulates or exhibits cluster B traits, it's like trying to teach someone a language they've never even heard of. You're not just trying to fix one specific behavior or address one misunderstanding. You're dealing with a person who lacks the very foundation required to even begin having these conversations. It's not a matter of one or two things that need to be learned or corrected. It's dozens of deeply ingrained behaviors, thought patterns, and emotional responses that have to be unlearned and rebuilt from scratch. Imagine trying to explain the nuances of emotional authenticity, respect, and trust, but before you can even begin, you realize they don't understand empathy, accountability, boundaries, or what a healthy relationship even looks like. You would literally have to teach them 48 other lessons before they could even grasp the basic concept of what you're talking about. They're operating on a completely different level of emotional awareness, one where manipulation, self-serving actions, and deflection are their default settings. The fundamental problem is this. In most relationships, you're building together, growing together, and learning together as equals. But in a relationship with someone who manipulates or displays these toxic traits, you're more like a teacher trying to elevate someone from emotional grade school to an adult level of understanding. And even if you could do that, assuming they're even willing to learn, it's a Herculean task, one that no relationship can realistically survive. The emotional exhaustion alone is enough to erode any authentic connection. You're not partners building together. You're their emotional caretaker, trying to drag them up to a basic level of understanding just so they can grasp concepts that most people already know and live by instinctively. For you, these things are obvious. treat people with respect, don't manipulate them, be accountable for your actions. But for someone with these traits, it's like trying to explain quantum physics before they even understand basic math. The education gap is so wide that by the time you quote-unquote teach them about the 48 foundational things they need to know, you've sacrificed your own emotional well-being, and the relationship has become an exhausting, one-sided project rather than a healthy partnership. Why you can't be with them. Authenticity requires a shared understanding of basic emotional truths. When you're with someone who manipulates or operates from a cluster B mindset, you're not just missing the deeper connection, you're missing the basic human connection. You'd have to invest so much energy just teaching them the fundamentals that the relationship will never have room to flourish into something real, because you're stuck doing the emotional labor of explaining the basics over and over again. You deserve to be with someone who already knows what it means to be a decent human being, someone who can meet you at your level, be on the same page, and build with you rather than dragging you down to their ground floor, making you responsible for their emotional education. Conclusion. The final word on cluster B behaviors. As we come to the end of this series on cluster B personality traits and behaviors, it's important to reflect on what we've covered and why this knowledge is crucial for maintaining our emotional well-being. Whether it's manipulation, emotional dysregulation, attention-seeking, or any of the other toxic behaviors we've explored, the common thread is that these patterns are rooted in a deep inability to form healthy, reciprocal relationships. For emotionally intelligent people, these behaviors can be baffling, even painful, because they defy the basic rules of human connection that most of us have learned from a young age. That's why engaging with individuals who exhibit these traits can feel like an endless uphill battle. You're constantly having to explain, teach, and justify concepts that should be second nature. The truth is, trying to have a relationship with someone who consistently manipulates, disregards boundaries, or refuses accountability will drain you. You can't fix them. You can't teach them to feel empathy or to stop seeking validation from unhealthy sources. You'd have to start at the ground floor and teach them dozens of basic emotional lessons that emotionally intelligent people already know and live by. And if you could teach them, it would take an immense amount of energy and emotional labor, energy you could be spending on building real, authentic connections with people who already get it. The reality is, you deserve better than that. You deserve relationships where you don't have to carry the emotional weight, where trust, respect, and empathy are shared effortlessly. Relationships where your boundaries are respected, your emotions are valued, and your growth is supported. So as you move forward, keep this in mind. The best relationships are those where you meet someone at your level, on the same page, someone who doesn't need to be taught how to be a decent human being. Surround yourself with people who understand the basics of emotional intelligence, who can meet you with authenticity, and who don't require you to take on the exhausting role of teacher, fixer, or caregiver. Remember, the most emotionally intelligent decision you can make is to protect your energy and focus on relationships that nurture your growth, rather than relationships that drag you into a cycle of emotional labor. You are worthy of that, and never let anyone make you feel otherwise. This wraps up our final episode in this 5-part series. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Hopefully, these insights have given you clarity, validation, and the tools you need to navigate your relationships with more confidence and self-respect. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and always remember to choose relationships that bring you peace and growth.